Okay, that was really weird. I'm back though. How's everybody doing? Let's try that again. Welcome to Sasquatch Out of the Shadows live. As always, I'm your host, Alex Pedikov. Hope everyone is having a great Monday night so far. As I always like to say, this is my favorite way to break up the Monday. So, as always, just a recap. Last week, we had on the Small Town Monsters crew as well as part of the Olympic Project crew, and we talked about our recent expedition to the Pacific Northwest. That was a lot of fun. We got to talk to Shane Corson and some of the OP members about the nest and just Seth and in general about the kind of projects that will be coming out of that trip. So next week, we're going to be doing a fun cryptozoology themed panel discussion. We're going to be joined by Jeremiah Byron of the Bigfoot Society podcast. He's been on the program before, as well as Tate Hieronymus of the Bluff Creek Project podcast. He's also been on the program, as well as Greg Morrill of All the Weird. We might have some other guests coming in as well, so stay tuned for that. Just wanted to say I got these cool little stickers that I just recently got made, entering Coas County, the Wood Devils. Now, this is a New Hampshire kind of Bigfoot story. If you guys are interested in this, I just got these stickers made, and Carrick St. Laurent actually made the design. So you folks on the channel will be aware of Carrick St. Laurent of Crash Course Cryptozoology. So we just got these stickers in, as well as a refill on the New England cryptid stickers. As you can see, they're both, turn it this way, they're both pretty awesome stickers. If you're curious, there's a link to the sticker in the comment. Just another way to help support the channel. And thanks to those that tuned in on Saturday night when Carrick and I were actually out in the woods live. That was a lot of fun. It was kind of cool doing squatching and actually having an internet connection. So we were able to actually kind of show some of the stuff that was in the field, and we were playing some chimp noises and baby noises and a lot of kind of weird noises. Very disconcerting when you're out there in the woods at night, but at least we had a connection, which was cool. So I was glad I got to share that. I might try to do stuff like that in the future as well. So last announcement, next week on the Small Town Monsters YouTube channel, my documentary series called Beyond the Trail will be debuting with a documentary called The Granite State Bigfoot Case. Now, that's the teaser that's on the channel. Some folks might have seen that. That was really fun to work on. It's about a New Hampshire Bigfoot case I've been working on. So I will definitely be talking about that on next week's show, as well as posting some announcements. So that should be fun. But with that out of the way, let's get to this week's show. So really excited for tonight's guests. We're going to be talking to Tobias and Emily Wayland, who are Fortean researchers who created the Singular Fortean Society. The Singular Fortean Society is based out of Madison, Wisconsin, and it's basically an organization that's devoted to journalism regarding the paranormal, including research, investigation, and community building. So they've examined everything from ghosts to UFOs to Bigfoot and other monsters. They've also been involved in researching the Lake Michigan Mothman case in recent years, so we'll definitely be talking about that. And you might have seen some of their work featured in Terror in the Skies, which was a Small Town Monsters production, as well as Expedition X. So we'll talk to them about a lot of that kind of stuff. So without further ado, let's bring in Emily and Tobias. Hey guys, how you doing?
Hey,
Hi.
good.
Good.
Thanks for coming on tonight, guys. Awesome to have you on. I was recently a couple months ago on your podcast, and I feel like that we could have just talked all night. So it's kind of nice to sort of continue that conversation.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for having us on.
Yeah, absolutely. Hello to everybody in the chat. I see there's a lot of folks in the chat. Kevin Hamilton, how you doing? Beelan says, Alex, looking forward to your shows. Thank you very much. Hey, Donald. Let's see, Jeremiah, the Bigfoot Society. Those are really nice stickers, Alex. Well, that's Carrick right there. He does some awesome work. He says, Carrick, this is Carrick himself. He says, I don't know what kind of chump made those Wood Devil stickers. Probably some guy with a long YouTube channel name. Carrick cracks me up. Awesome. But anyway, let's just jump right into the topic. So I have a number of set questions here. And as I mentioned, I usually don't ever get through all of them. But let's just start with the basics. What got you guys interested in individually, I suppose, in the paranormal, in the Fortean, in all these sorts of topics? I see you have a special guest too.
This is AON.
Yeah, just off screen, the dog's there. He might make an appearance at some point.
Awesome.
That's a good question, and it's certainly interesting. Did you want to start with yours? Mine's always long.
Sure. I mean, I guess I was always some kind of a weird kid. I was always like into like sci-fi, fantasy, that kind of thing. And I was just always like mesmerized by it. But I never really like had an experience growing up. I think, my family was very skeptical about them. So I was raised to be skeptical. So I was like, oh, so I think I naturally picked up the whole mentality of like, oh, that's probably fake, but I think it's cool. So I'm still going to like watch the shows and dig around on the internet somewhat. So I would say my curiosity became a little bit more serious when I met this guy. But there was an experience I had in my 20s that I think kind of like piqued my interest more. And I guess I'll sum up what the experience is and then get into it from there. I had a visitation from my deceased grandfather who had died some months before. And at the time, I just kind of disregarded it as a dream because I was conditioned to do that. But I remembered I had just gone through like a breakup, as you do in your 20s. And I was having like some kind of like, sleepless nights. I'd toss and turn. I actually had a problem with bats coming into my room at that apartment. So I was like,
wow,
I really slept with the lights on and was kind of awake all the time. So I was just kind of aware. But I remember I was like dealing with stuff. I'm like, oh man, is a bat going to come in this room again? And then I saw like a shadowy figure as I was kind of like waking up, but kind of groggy. Towards my room was in the basement. So like some light would come in through the windows of the basement. And I could see his shadowy figure, and I picked it out that it was him because it had like his perfect comb over, his glasses, his cleft chin, and then like his sweater, just like, so he was like pretty shadowy except for the features that were kind of highlighted there. And then he said, "It's a shame you two couldn't get along, but you're going to be okay, honey." And it was his voice.
Wow.
And I was just so like groggy, but like comforted by it. I didn't really see him like come or leave. And I think I kind of just went back to bed. But so I disregarded that as a dream for a while. And once I met Tobias, I told him about my experiences, as you do. And he kind of convinced me that, hey, this might have been more real and you shouldn't just shrug it off as a dream. Like,
right.
Possible it's still a dream. We don't know that for sure. But like, I think that's when I started to be able to like feel more comfortable and take that kind of thing seriously. So I'm more new to investigation. I've only been doing this kind of like research work since we got started 5 years ago.
Sure.
But I think for me, I've had like a couple experiences since then, but it's been cool to kind of have like the new fresh perspective of the team.
Right.
So that's where I come from.
Very cool. I think that's been really helpful, honestly. Because when you're a weirdo long enough, like you don't want to lose perspective, honestly. No. So it's nice to have somebody around who, ask the sort of questions that really only get asked from somebody who's sort of from the outside.
And I think that it helps people. Me learning to accept to tell my story when I was otherwise shy to helps others.
Oh, for sure. And that's something that we really try to emphasize, when it comes to the kinds of people who report this kind of stuff. They are, for lack of a better word, just normal people, frankly.
Right.
They could work in your office, go to your church. They might be shopping at your grocery store and you wouldn't look at them twice, frankly. And so, it's nice being able to use ourselves, probably more so, Emily, as sort of an example of the type of person who comes to us, frankly. And, she's a nice, normal person,
Sure. No, I think it's true. I mean, most people, and you guys have experienced this, I've experienced this, most of the people that you end up talking to, whether they've had, Bigfoot sighting or some kind of paranormal experience, it's usually, for the most part, people that didn't really expect it. Sure, there was a lot of people researching and investigating that claim to have experiences, which I think should be scrutinized a little more than just the random person that doesn't really seem like they have anything to gain and they just maybe can't figure out what happened to them. So it's definitely really interesting kind of to have that perspective, I'm sure, with what you guys do. But did you want to say a little bit about what got you into it, Tobias?
Oh, sure. So really a series of experiences beginning when I was very young. I would experience nighttime visitations. And the oldest memories are fairly hazy, because when I say
Right.
young, I mean like my earliest memories. A lot of them are of being terrified to go to bed, because I knew when I did, something was going to come for me. And
Wow.
so it would be stuff like feeling like something digging into my sides, or being lifted. um, I was a little kid, so I would do things like try to pull the blankets over my head, and I can recall those being buffeted seemingly by hands, on the outside, and sort of things like that. And that progressed into seeing shadow people, and a number of other experiences. I think probably the most powerful would have been when I was in my early 20s. I was living with my parents, and I had gone to bed one night as per usual. Frankly, like there's nothing unusual about that night. But I woke up suddenly, and this is in the suburbs. So this is Sun Prairie, Wisconsin, and it's a relatively well lit area, and so there was plenty of ambient light coming from outside. And so as I woke up, I looked around. I wasn't paralyzed or anything. I could definitely move, and so I turned my head and I look around my room, sort of wondering like why I'm suddenly awake. And I can make everything out. Everything's where it's supposed to be. I can see my dresser and bookshelves, weight bench, like it's all there. But it seemed to be a skewed perspective, and it took me a second to realize that the reason that things looked a little off is because I seemed to be floating about 3 feet above my bed, and I look over to my left, and there's this figure, man-sized black silhouette, just sort of standing there. And I got the feeling that I wasn't supposed to be awake for this. Like I said, I definitely could move, but I didn't think under the circumstances it was probably a great idea, because it really felt like I was interrupting something. And so I look at this thing, and it reaches its hand out, and I'll never forget this. I can still feel it. It reached its hand out and sort of placed it on my chest, and I interpreted that as comforting, like just trying to comfort me. And then I was lowered back down, and it just vanished. And so at that point, I'm sort of lying there on top of my comforter. I certainly hadn't fallen asleep on top of my comforter, which was pulled up pretty high on the bed too, which was also weird. And I had been through this kind of thing before. I mean, that was a extreme example, I would
Sure.
say, but certainly not anything that really I felt warranted. What waking people, like waking anybody up. What am I going to do? Like go wake up my parents and tell them about that? It didn't work when I was a kid. I didn't think it was going to work when I was at 22, and I wasn't hurt. I'd never actually been hurt by any of this stuff. And so I just kind of lied there for a while and mulled it over, and just went back to sleep, because what else do you do in that situation, frankly?
Right.
But because of stuff like that from a very early age, because I'm 41 now, and when I was a kid, like there wasn't any internet or anything, so frankly, if you had this kind of stuff happen to you, and you lived in a relatively small town or city, you didn't have much recourse other than to go to the library, which is what I did. I would ride my bike down to the library literally every chance I could. And I picked up books by like John Keel and Brad Steiger, or Lauren Coleman, and I read them. I read them all, and it, in a way, helped me sort of process what I was going through. Being able to read about other people having those types of experiences, like at the very least, it let me know that I wasn't alone. You know, like other people were going through this or had gone through this. And so, you know, by the time I was in my mid to late 20s, I was sort of trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And I kind of landed on this, honestly. You know, I started volunteering as a field investigator for MUFON for several years. And then just, you know, I wasn't necessarily getting what I wanted out of that organization. And so I set off on my own, you know, met Emily in 2015.
Yes.
And the rest is history. Now we have the Singular Fortean Society. And if I can in any way, you know, help or comfort people, like the way that those authors and many more, like Whitley Strieber, like all of these authors who wrote all of these really impactful books, if I can in any way help anybody the way that any of those people help me, I mean, then it's all worth it. That's why we do this.
Yeah, that's really interesting. That's quite a perspective to have, I guess, coming into it. A lot of people enter it for, you know, trying to get their own answers. I'm sure that's part of it, but that's very interesting, talking about almost, it seems like you're almost wanting to be a little bit of a resource for people that might not really understand what's going on. And that's what I wanted to talk about a little bit with the Singular Fortean Society. You guys have written a lot of articles about a lot of different topics. So you want to talk a little bit about kind of the Singular Fortean Society, what it is and what it does?
Sure.
We started the Singular Fortean Society 5 years ago tomorrow, actually.
Oh, congratulations.
Yeah, so that it came up pretty fast. Doesn't feel like it. Basically, you know, we got together and we, you know, I think on our first date, we were even talking about, like, I think you put it out there right away that you were into this.
I've had to be very upfront about it, because you don't want to get to like the third date and have her find out that you're into ghosts and UFOs and Mothman and stuff.
Right. And I think I was like, ooh, that's cool. And I told you the story about a place that I was interested in, which is the Paulding Light up in the northern upper peninsula of Michigan. And, you know, I think it was just kind of like, well, we're both into this. And, you know, we keep dating. And then I think we both kind of realized that we are both, you know, creative project people. He's a writer and I'm a graphic designer, photographer. So those complementary skill sets, it just kind of sort of made sense to get together and do things. And we had done, I think, one investigation by ourselves. I think the October prior to our founding, we went to a cemetery that is reputedly haunted here in Madison, Wisconsin. And we wrote an article on it. He wrote an article on it. I took pictures. But we had posted that on, I think it was on explainedmysteries.com.
That sounds right.
And then I think eventually we just kind of pretty quickly we decided we wanted to host it ourselves. So we kind of started out just doing that, like, and we still do it sometimes, but we started it with just like, you know, like a blog and like our own feature stories on places we'd been. But then after that, we kind of pivoted the next year and kind of became more of like a news site and more into the research. And we started building our community from there. And I would say 2017 was our,
sort of rebranded.
Yeah, as we were. So,
well, there's if I could just expand.
Yeah, totally.
Sort of
it's been a long time.
No, I don't disagree with anything you said. No, I just wanted to sort of explain, I think, why we decided to rebrand. I mean, there was a point there where, you know, looking around on the internet, there were a lot of blogs, and like nobody needed my opinion more than this community needed a solid news site, like somebody who was actually going to take paranormal, you know, cryptozoological, ufological, whatever news, and present it, you know, in an objective, sort of unbiased fashion. So.
Sure.
That really was the impetus behind that. Like, I'm happy to come on podcasts and give my like opinion on anything anybody wants, but like there are, you know, like I said, there's just a lot of blogs out there, and opinions are a dime a dozen. But
oh gosh, yeah,
something
everybody does that now.
Yeah, you know, and something I think we both felt that this community was missing was a decent news source.
And honestly. I think too, like, you know, like around Halloween every year, the mainstream and local media sources try to pick these stories up.
Right.
And I don't think they're given the same level of seriousness and depth that we offer it. And I think that in most cases that those cases need to be told that way, because, you know, somebody comes forward about this experience they had and they might be ridiculed for it. You know, it could ruin lives because people are scared to come out and embarrassed, and they could like get made fun of at work. Family members could say they're crazy, that kind of stuff. And when they're covered so lightly by a mainstream media source, it just kind of dismisses it.
Yeah, it's a huge disservice to people. I mean, the most common narrative that we get from witnesses who come to us is that, you know, they have this impossible experience. You know, maybe they saw a UFO, you know, maybe it was a nighttime visitation or abduction event or a ghost or some kind of cryptid, Mothman, whatever. And the first thing they want to do, because these are powerful events for these people, you know, like they're very impactful, often traumatic, and they want to tell somebody, they want to tell a loved one. And so they'll go to a good friend or a family member, spouse, sibling, parent, whatever, and they'll tell them their story. And the most common reaction by this person that they should be able to trust is that they get laughed at. And it's hurtful. And they don't talk about it again until they find somebody like us. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, every time the local news station plays the X-Files theme behind a UFO story or something, like it's disrespectful to these people who, I don't care what you believe. You know, you could believe that they misidentified something, or there was some sort of prosaic explanation. That's not important, because what's important is that no matter what it is, it's having a real effect on these people's lives, and they deserve the basic human decency of being treated with respect and being taken seriously, frankly.
Mm-hmm. Oh, totally. I 100% agree with that ethos, I suppose, of treating the people with respect. And that's something I've experienced too, is a lot of the people there's a reluctance to want to tell their story until they're comfortable enough with you to do it, you know, if you happen to be the person talking to them. So of course they're not going around, you know, sharing their story widely. They may have had some experiences that sort of burnt them, and they're tight-lipped about it. I mean, how can you blame people? But what I want to do here is I'll actually just pull up the site here. Let me just share my screen. I just want to show folks how your site actually works. It's pretty cool. So you go to the singularfortean.com. Obviously you have a contact area. So let's say somebody has some sort of thing they want to share. That's I'm assuming how they can reach out to you or talk to you. But what I really like about it is you can go right up to the top and click news, right? And you just have article after article, you know, April 25th, 20th. You could do it, you know, if you want to learn about Ogopogo, here, you guys have an awesome article about Ogopogo. So there's all like a lot of really interesting news, paranormal related news, like you're saying. It's not just silly sort of tabloid-esque stories. It covers a pretty wide range of topics. And then you can go over to the info, and there's another kind of contact area. And then Forteana. Now that's something I want to talk about. But what's cool is, you know, you can actually go into different topics there, right? If I go to monsters, let's say I'm interested in cryptids, I can go down and I want to find out about the Wendigo, right? I can click that and then find, you guys have done some pretty awesome, you know, kind of descriptions about these things. And then also, I'm assuming it kind of links to articles that you might have written about that particular topic. So the illustrations are great. I'm assuming that's Emily's doing?
Yes.
Oh, yes. Awesome.
I like to say that Emily is literally the reason that I am not ranting like a madman somewhere on the internet, like in green text on a black background. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Seriously, like, I mean, she's just done such a great job with the overall aesthetic.
It really is. I mean, the site looks great. I mean, you can just click on lake monsters, and there's lots of articles, Chasing Legends thing here. I mean, there's all kinds of little, you know, if you're specifically interested in cryptids, great resource. And, you know, I'm assuming that's always an ever-growing sort of catalog. Yeah. But then you obviously have other things, and you guys have sort of your own, I don't want to say club, but kind of society, right? There's like memberships or something like that.
Oh, sure. So for anybody who's interested
Oh.
to want to be a part of it, we do have a Patreon. So patreon.com/Singular Fortean, and there's different levels there, of course, which is similar to any other Patreon. And
Sure.
when we first started out, like, there's a reason society is in the name. It's not just alliterative, like, it's we really wanted a community of like-minded people. And so that's something we've been able to begin through Patreon, and it really is for anybody who wants to participate. Like, we have some behind the scenes stuff or exclusive videos, podcasts, and things. And so for anybody who's not particularly interested in being very interactive, like, there is a lot of that sort of content, but the actual member level is really for people who want to participate in live investigations,
right,
and meetups and our book club. And I feel like, well, just me being me, I felt like I wanted to be a part of a society that I would want to belong to.
Yeah.
And so that's something we've been trying to put together. I mean, not everything we do, of course, is behind a paywall or anything. Obviously, there's tons of free content on singularfortean.com, and we're active on social media, because I don't believe in putting that kind of barrier between people who need help, for instance. But yeah, I mean, definitely anybody who's interested in what we do, I would encourage them to at least check it out, because there's pretty much something for everybody who's interested in anything the Singular Fortean Society is doing.
Yeah, definitely. No, I mean, it makes sense. As you said, the premise of that being, kind of taking these topics seriously. Especially, I'm sure people have run into your articles just by searching, a certain event that might have happened, and yours is probably one of the ones that has popped up. I know that's certainly happened for me, and I've read a number of the articles when you guys have been putting them out, because you put them out at a great rate, and you also have just a lot of topics you covered. As I mentioned, it's not just paranormal stuff. You have cryptids, other sort of events that might be happening in the community, or breaking the news in terms of the online, the Facebook cryptid communities. I feel like it's almost a way of there will be these things that kind of go viral, right? But whether it's an image or a piece of video or some kind of a sign, and there's all kinds of opinions all over the place. And you guys always do a good job of sort of just kind of narrowing it in and saying, well, this is what's happening. People are saying this and that. I think that's a really cool way of kind of just covering what's going on, because lots of other subcultures, topics have that, but cryptozoology and the paranormal, I guess, is a little lacking in that department. So,
well, thank you. Yeah, I mean, obviously that's really one of the things that, I mean, it's not just the mainstream news media or something that's screwing up the cryptid or UFO or ghost communities. There's a lot of, well, like you said, there's a lot of misinformation that comes from unsourced material online, and the dissemination of that material. And so a lot of the time, we couldn't keep up trying to write an article on every single photograph or video or whatever. Obviously, if something compelling comes along, then that is legitimate news, and we want to cover it. But the other part of that is, every once in a while, something that is clearly illegitimate will go viral, and you'll see a lot of misinformation. And at that point, I feel as a news site, we have an obligation to inform people. I mean, for instance, there was that viral video of the I don't know what they were calling it, like a gargoyle or something, maybe, that was flying around, and I think it landed in a tree or on a telephone pole or something. And it was huge. I saw this video, I don't know how many different places, and it took me maybe an hour or two, but I was able to track down the actual CGI production company who made that, and they were fairly upfront about it. But they were somewhere down south, and so maybe that what made it a little more difficult for other people to find. And of course, plenty of people don't want to find that because they're more interested in the BS. But yeah, I mean, that was one where now every time, because it still goes around, but now every single time I don't have to go through and explain it again. I could just like I'll post a link to our article and be like, no, it's not real. Here's why.
Yeah, definitely.
But yeah, that's something that we want to be able to provide for the community as well.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, there's you mentioned, there's a lot of BS, whether it be within individual cryptid communities or the paranormal in general. There's just a lot of stuff, and I think having a place like that, it definitely adds credibility to these topics. And like you said, you can just say, well, hey, this is that same hoax that's been trotted out so many times. Let's kind of put that to bed. Carrick of Crash Course Cryptozoology, of course, says the website is so commendable. I enjoyed the informative aspect of as a researcher and the artistic nature as a graphic designer. Well done, Emily and Tobias.
Thank you.
Well, that means a lot. I mean, we know Carrick, and he's a great guy, obviously. And I respect his work a lot too. So I mean, that means a lot. Yes, thank you very much.
Yeah, totally. Him and I had a fun time this weekend. I'll just put a little information out that I know we talked about it on the stream. We did a live stream in the woods as we were squatching on Saturday night, but we spent some time in an area where there's been a history of kind of Bigfoot reportings, and Carrick had been contacted by this family that was having activity, happen starting last June, just randomly 5 a.m, 3 knocks they'd hear outside their window, as the windows were open during the summer months, and it would end, and they're kind of eagerly waiting. Fantastic folks. I mean, so nice. And we kind of talked to them for a bit and then spent a night in the woods, and it was great. But just a lot of great stuff happening. But something I do want to talk about, and I see there's already a question about it, which we'll take in a little bit here, is the Lake Michigan Mothman. So that's kind of, I don't want to say your signature case, but that's the case that you've written a book on, and you've been featured in documentaries and television works, kind of talking about that. So do you want to say to folks maybe a little about what the Lake Michigan Mothman case is?
Yeah, absolutely. So as far as our involvement in it, it would have been spring of 2017. I had seen a trio of sighting reports come through the MUFON case management system, and they had written a short article about it on their website. And so, I dug into it the very little amount that I could, because they weren't really releasing a lot of information about it. But I thought, this would be an interesting little article. Our readers would enjoy it. Really didn't think it was going to go anywhere.
Sure.
And I thought that would be it. I just published it and kind of forgot about it. And then I kept seeing these reports come out, and they were coming out through websites that honestly I wasn't familiar with at that time. Phantoms and Monsters and UFO Clearinghouse. Now, I'm not, and I guess I don't know the best way to put it, other than like I really wasn't very active in like the online paranormal community. I've never really been a big like television guy either. So I had never seen any of the shows or anything, for the most part, with some exceptions, but so I really wasn't familiar with these websites at all. And I saw these reports coming through, and people were fairly consistently reporting what sounded an awful lot like a winged humanoid. The reports mostly, at least at first, centered around the Chicago area, which isn't too far away from us. And so I thought, well, I better interview these guys. Like, I better reach out to Lon Strickler over at Phantoms and Monsters and Manuel Navarrete over at UFO Clearinghouse and see, what the heck is going on with these weird winged creature sightings. And so, I got them both on the telephone separately and was able to interview them, and they were both very forthcoming with everything they've been able to do so far. And it was compelling in that at that time, especially, neither one of them really had their own narrative. Like so often in this field, people will immediately, it's like they have this template that they just overlay on every report and sighting to kind of make it fit into their paradigm. And there really wasn't any of that happening. No, like they weren't saying, oh, it's extraterrestrial or interdimensional or biological or terrestrial being or something. No, it was just like, I don't know, these are weird, we don't know what it is, this is what people have said so far, and that piqued my interest. And it wasn't too long after that, we actually had some mutual friends in common, and we were asked to participate in the investigation, especially considering our proximity. And, because we had our own platform, it wasn't very long until we started receiving our own sightings. And so, from that point on, we were really just in it. There have been, I don't know, well over 100 sighting reports so far. Yeah. And I mean, I've personally spoken to several dozen witnesses. We've visited quite a few sighting areas, it's just been a whole thing.
Yeah, that's what's so interesting about the Mothman subject. Obviously, people know about the Mothman of Point Pleasant. That's the most famous case out there, and there's this really fascination to it. I mean, it's one of the top sort of cryptids, even though some might argue it's not really a cryptid because there's so many other paranormal elements involved, whether it's UFOs, Men in Black, all the sort of high strangeness associated with it. But it is sort of lumped in with the cryptid category because of that animal kind of Mothman-like depiction. But obviously, it's not just in Point Pleasant, as you've talked about with what you guys have worked on. Is there a sighting in particular that really stands out in either of your minds, or you guys maybe have different ones? If you care to share, like, of all the witnesses you've spoken to, something that really kind of intrigued you that perhaps to this day is still kind of it sticks out in your mind? Sure.
Well, actually, first though, I want to say I think a lot of people conflate cryptid with monster, frankly. Right. So anytime they just see any monster, and I'm guilty of that because as an English major, I just go with the common usage of words usually. Right. So if everybody's calling monsters cryptids, I guess they're cryptids, and I need to be able to communicate with our readers.
Sure.
And then the other part of that too is we were very resistant to use that Mothman title. I was clumsily fitting like flying humanoid into headlines,
right,
for like a year, 2 years. Before finally I just kind of threw my hands up and I was like, there's too many similarities.
It just sticks.
It's the right framing for this story because that's what people are seeing. It just is what it is. But do you want to go? Like, what do you like? What's your big one?
I think too, because I think Tobias does most of the work with the interviews and the research and that kind of stuff, especially because he connected with Lon. I kind of came in this investigation just kind of when I was needed to take pictures or investigate pictures and stuff like that. But it definitely gave me a good perspective on what that's all like. But there's this one couple down in Woodstock, Illinois that we met. And that's my favorite witness and investigation that we've done because they're down in Woodstock, Illinois, and this guy was just driving down the street from where he lives to go to Walgreens to get some milk. Very mundane situation.
Sure.
And he's by it's like a pond.
It's a Dewfield Pond conservation
area. So it's very marshy along there. And it goes all the way down that street on one side, and even their yard opens up to it. But he was driving home from Walgreens and, just doing anything. And then all of a sudden he saw basically what he described as a Bigfoot with wings cross the road.
A big, leathery, I think he might have used the word gargoyle wings.
Yeah, I think he did. Huh. He sent he had a sketch too, but I think it was how it went was his wife initially contacted Lon, and the guy was very reluctant and hesitant to even share a story, but at the same time he wanted to get it out because kind of holding that onto that is kind of difficult. And they both are known in their community. They both have positions of status. So they did not want to be revealed as having these experiences, life-ruining stuff. But we arrived, and they were so normal. And I think that, I mean, everybody usually is, but I think the level of, you could really tell the level of fear and concern and hesitation to trust us.
Right.
Even though we had, agreed to do this and communicated and everything. But, he showed us the area, and, we saw, like, I think a couple maybe tracks out in the ice along the pond there. And as soon as he was kind of done showing us that stuff, he was just like, whew, okay, now that's done with,
Yeah.
So I think that really just kind of gave me a sense of, like, the human side of this. And it really, like, his story and his evidence were so interesting also, because I think it was like, was it before or after that happened, that it happened across the way?
There's are you talking about the police report?
Yes.
That was a couple days after his sighting. Now, when we went down to investigate that one too, that was the area where we found an anomalous footprint. I can't say what it was. It was in ice, so there wasn't, any way to record it better than just photographing it, which we did. But it's less impressive, I think, in the photograph than it was
in person.
Yeah, absolutely. But it for all intents and purposes looked like a large sort of distorted human or humanoid footprint. But it was there was just one, which was so weird, because there's a lot of other footprints in that area. A lot of canines, a lot of look like large ambulatory birds. I would guess, either a crane or a heron in that area. And there were some human footprints, boot prints, of course.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was just the weirdest thing. And it was towards the exit of the Dewfield Pond area where this thing was supposed to have come out of and crossed the street in front of this guy. There was just the one weird, overly large footprint, looked like a bare foot in ice. So
wow.
I don't know, but I mean, it was compelling. And then, like Emily mentioned, it was a couple days later we were contacted, or a couple days after this guy's sighting, we were contacted by somebody in that same area who said that he had seen basically the same thing in the McHenry County Fairgrounds, which is right where this thing would have been headed. It's on the opposite side of the street from the Dewfield Pond conservation area. And so this guy emailed us to say, hey, basically I saw the same thing. I freaked out. I called 911, and it was a whole thing. And so I was like, wow. That's amazing. Can I interview you, and do you have a copy of that police report? And then we just never heard back, which happens all the time.
No. Yeah.
Now FOIA is a thing, and so I thought, well, hey, this guy said that he called 911. There's got to be a record of it if that actually happened, right? And so I ended up getting in touch with the McHenry County Sheriff's Department, and they were very helpful. Like they didn't have an official report because there was no real investigation done, but they had an incident detail report, because they have to, anytime anybody calls 911.
They have to keep sort of a log of things.
Right. And so, I mean, basically it was the same story that the guy had told before in his email where, he said he saw this thing, and he was apparently concerned enough to call 911. And a sheriff's deputy came out, didn't see any monster, but we know that happened. So, and it's interesting to me, of course, because I don't think most people call 911 lightly, especially for something like that. I mean, you can get in a lot of trouble for that, honestly. So,
yeah, I mean, especially the fact that you're talking about this other person that you've spoken to that had this experience, that is wanting to remain anonymous because of reasons that might affect their career. So it's not like you really, and this guy who filed the police report didn't really seem like he wanted to anything to do with the case. So why are people just making this up for fun? It doesn't seem like something especially people in a position that they might be in to do, if they wanted to kind of pull somebody's leg or board. It just seems interesting and very interesting case. Bigfoot described with wings sort of thing. And you said gargoyle was also a word used?
I believe.
Sure.
I'd have to go back and look at the actual report, but I think because Lon interviewed him first, and then, he was impressed enough where he was just like, hey, Tobias, like, you got to talk to this guy. And if you and Emily can get down there, you should get down there. And so, yeah, I mean, I remember talking to him over the phone, and we didn't have a really good connection, but yeah, I mean, it's one thing to read these reports, after I've written them or we published them on our website. But, when you're actually speaking to another adult and you can hear the concern and the fear, frankly, in their voice, it's powerful. It really is. Like there's no way around it. And that's definitely what I got speaking to this guy. And then, like Emily said, even after we went down there, I felt that they were appreciative, like certainly
Right.
It's difficult. Even when you trust somebody, talking about stuff like this can be difficult. Because I think that the embarrassment is so ingrained in us. It's just pounded into us by society our whole lives that this is all ridiculous and you should be embarrassed to even be talking about it or entertaining it. And so, even if it's somebody that you trust, which at that point, I think, they had no reason not to. It can be hard, and it was. But again, like Emily said, it seemed like there was some relief there. I really do think that they were appreciative of being able to sort of get it off their chest. There's a cathartic element, I think, in sharing these stories, even if the investigation doesn't tell you exactly what the monster is. And let's face it, it almost never does.
Yeah.
There's at least, well, like when I was a kid and I discovered these writers and investigators, at least that there are people out there who have experienced something similar.
Yeah.
And there are people taking it seriously.
You're not alone. I think that's something a lot of us in this realm, I would suppose, that have talked to witnesses and just talked to other people. We're probably in a position before where we thought, there's not many people interested in this kind of stuff. It's always nice to know that there's people who are willing to listen and, treat it seriously and not just kind of laugh it off. Very interesting. Now I'm going to start taking some questions. So we have one from Jordan Warner. How's it going, Jordan? He says, is there any correlation or commonality to Mothman or sightings of other winged angelic type entities when witnesses have a faith or religious background? Is it more common or not as much?
That is a really, really interesting question.
Yeah.
And so now I have noted some trends. Now, one of the interesting things to me actually is when it comes to people who have any kind of religious faith, at least that I've interviewed. Now, it doesn't seem to affect what they report. Like using that Woodstock witness as an example. Now, he and his wife are Christians, and it didn't affect what he saw, but it did affect the narrative that was applied to it. At least the narrative that they were sort of tentatively entertaining. And so, something that I do as a writer and something that I try to be very, very aware of is the difference between story and narrative. And so a story is that's what actually happened. And then the narrative is the telling of what happened, through some narrator's perspective. In this case, it's often the witness. And so part of our job as investigators is to separate story from narrative and find out what happened as opposed to that person's interpretation of what happened or how they're trying to present it to you. And so in the case of people with religious faith, Now, it doesn't seem like they're seeing angels more than anybody else. It's really more that they'll see something like this winged Bigfoot or a 8-foot tall black winged creature with red eyes or something, and instead of interpreting it in a like agnostic sense, so instead of going, oh hey, that must have been a space alien or an interdimensional monster or a science experiment gone awry, they will say, oh man, that was a demon, or that was a Nephilim, or something similar. Right. And so that's really the only difference that I see there. Like that's the big trend as far as like religious faith is concerned. They're certainly not more likely to see something like this either, from my experience, like from the data that we have. Now, I will say that one other trend that I've noticed, specifically in well, no, I guess not necessarily represented in the Lake Michigan Mothman, because it has happened in enough other cases. I'd have to do something far more accurate statistically than just remembering it off the top of my head. But it's not uncommon for witnesses to report psychic experiences as well. So,
right.
So take that for what it's worth too. I think that sort of the realm of psychic phenomena, I think it tends to share a lot with other areas of spirituality. There's certainly a lot of overlap there, which is why I thought of it as soon as somebody brought up religion.
Sure.
So, but yeah, that's another one.
Certainly an interesting way to look at it, because essentially people have experiences and they try to, I don't want to say justify, but rationalize it within their own worldview, right? So if they're extremely science oriented, they're probably going to try to identify it as some sort of biological entity. Whereas if someone maybe is a little religious, it might fit right into their religious view of the world, or just their view of the world in general. So that's really interesting. Whereas you're trying to kind of, regardless of how they're trying to kind of rationalize it, you're just saying, well, what exactly happened, without, while taking away that part where they say, well, this is because of this. It happened because, some religious phrase, or, whatever the case may be. So I think that's a really interesting way of putting it. I think a lot of people just sort of wouldn't necessarily draw that connection of being able to separate narrative and story, because sometimes, especially in this field, they kind of go hand in hand a lot of the time. So very interesting.
It is difficult because what we have most of the time is witness testimony, and often that's all we have. And we'll do our best to verify the details of any witness testimony that we can. Often it will be checking historical weather data, verifying like geographic information, making sure everything's where they said it was, so they would be capable of seeing things where they said that they saw things, and
right.
and things like that. But you're right. I mean, it can be tremendously difficult. I think, though, that you can, if you're asking the right questions, I think that you can really sort of get to the heart of their story without or with a minimum of their particular like narrative interpretation.
Right. No, totally. Yeah, that's definitely really interesting to think about it from that perspective. Now, I do want to take this question from Kevin Hamilton, who asked, with Bigfoot, there is allegedly hundreds or thousands of them said to exist all over the world. With Mothman, it is believed there is only, or I guess there's a question, with Mothman, is it believed there is only one Mothman? In theory, everyone is seeing the same one?
Sure. I mean, that's a really good question. I think that, in my opinion, there's no way that everybody's seeing the same one.
Yeah, they're too different in the descriptions sometimes.
Oh, for sure. There's a definite there's a level of variance, in the descriptions that I think disallows that. I think that when you've got something named, with a singular name like Mothman, like, how do you pluralize that? Is it Mothman? Mothmans? I have no idea.
Mothmans.
Right. It almost like desperately needs to be rebranded as something else, because it doesn't make it very easy to convey any plurality. But yeah, I think fundamentally, given like Emily said, the relatively minor but still existent variation in descriptions, their geographic like separation, they happen all over the place. I mean, Lake Michigan isn't particularly close to West Virginia, and we've got reports from plenty of other places as well, and I know other people have also. And so, yeah, I mean, without any good evidence to support the idea of one single entity being responsible for every sighting, I think that it's a fair assumption to make that there has to be more than one. Of course, we don't know that, but I would lean that way, certainly.
Yeah, I mean, even just talking about what you mentioned with those specific cases there with the police report and everything, that description of like a Bigfoot-like creature with wings, that's certainly different than maybe some of the historical ones that would have been reported in Point Pleasant. And in general, with like the flying humanoid phenomena, I mean, you have, I don't know if you'd consider it with Mothman exactly, but in that humanoid category, the witches kind of seen in Mexico and Central America and some of these areas, very different descriptions of things. And like you said, even with Mothman itself, or if we're using that, I guess, as an umbrella term for a lot of different phenomena.
Yeah, I think when it comes to, and I should have mentioned this before, now that I don't want people to get the idea that the witness description in that particular report was indicative of the general sort of description that we found. It actually very much was in outlier in that case, and the reason it was included was its proximity to other cases. So I mean, at the end of the day, it was a winged humanoid case happening nearby a bunch of other winged humanoid cases, and so it was included in the investigation. But yeah, it really bears almost no resemblance to what other people were describing, which is a lot closer to the black 7 or 8 foot tall winged humanoid with often glowing red eyes.
Yeah, wow. So this kind of talks about a little bit about what we mentioned earlier, but maybe kind of going over a little more. Crash Course Cryptozoology, obviously, Carrick asks, how many of the Mothman type reports that Tobias and Emily have involve other paranormal phenomena?
That's a pretty good amount.
Yeah.
And that's something that, boy, now that I think of it, I would or should probably go back and add to our timeline, sort of categorize it, in that way. But quite a few of them do. And I think, honestly, when you're familiarizing yourself with this investigation, like, it's important to note that a good number, I mean, just ballparking it, probably 40% or so of the sightings documented are likely to be misidentifications. And most often it's going to be of some large bird.
Right.
And so when you look at the timeline, like we've added like who investigated it, if it was us, if it was Fans of Monsters, if it was UFO Clearinghouse, whatever, if it was MUFON. And then after that, sort of our determination, like, do we think this is most likely to be a large bird? Do we think this is most likely to be a potential hoax? Or do we think this is most likely to be unexplained? And unexplained is just unexplained. And so when you look at the ones most likely to be misidentified large birds, they lack a lot of those paranormal elements. It's usually just something seen flying very briefly at a distance that was pretty big, and the person didn't know what it was. And so they, reported it as some kind of entity that, for lack of a better word, would be a cryptid or monster or something, just mostly because they don't understand it.
Right.
When you look at the cases that are unexplained, and by that I mean, according to the information that we have now, couldn't be a misidentified large bird, and we're reasonably certain are not potential hoaxes. And in fact, there have been very, very few hoaxes, or really no confirmed hoaxes, and maybe one or two that even have the possibility of being one. Really, or at least would it all be likely? But yeah, I mean, when you look at the unexplained cases, yeah, they often include other paranormal elements. That could be a UFO sighting in the same area. That could be feeling transfixed by this thing's gaze, an unusual or heightened level of fear or really terror. Sometimes it's felt before they even know the creature is there. Some people will report phenomena similar to a haunting happening in their home. We've heard people talk about babies crying, weird fires,
Wow.
Electrical devices turning themselves on, things like that after sightings like this. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that there is a preponderance of paranormal phenomena in the cases which themselves seem the likeliest to actually be of something unexplained or unusual, potentially paranormal.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I mean, you had mentioned earlier, obviously, the psychic sort of ability or things that are reported oftentimes with that. So it's interesting to know that there are other things. I mean, the classic Mothman case obviously involved a lot of other things happening in the immediate proximity or even to some of the witnesses. So as I mentioned earlier, just it's interesting, that Mothman categorization in that cryptid category. But, winged humanoids, flying cryptids are certainly not, unusual for the cryptid category. So there's a lot of seemingly bridging between more paranormal elements, perhaps, and terrestrial beings, let's say, that a lot of cryptids are considered to be. But
oh, sure. Well, I think if when you look at this thing specifically too, because the traditional sort of definition of cryptid, basically being of an undiscovered animal, right? Anything falling under that category should have to adhere to certain biological principles,
right.
And when you look at these reports of flying humanoids, they don't make any sense biologically.
Right.
It doesn't seem like a man-sized or really bigger creature, a huge man, 7 or 8 feet tall, would need a 20+ foot wingspan minimum just to get off the ground. And that's not what people are reporting at all. And so they're really, to my mind, doesn't seem like any reasonable biological explanation for the existence of whatever this thing is. I'm open to being wrong, of course.
Right.
It just doesn't seem that way.
It's almost more of a stretch to say that these are, an undiscovered species of winged human-like creatures than it is to say
Where
that
do they live?
Something stranger than that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is interesting. Now, speaking of that, I want to transition just a little bit into the Bigfoot topic. Obviously, it's a hotly debated topic throughout the community and around the world, different types of theories about what it could be. You guys are obviously in the Midwest. Midwest is somewhat known in some areas for Bigfoot reports and that sort of stuff. And what have you found, like, in your time in the Midwest? Any interesting Bigfoot cases or anything that you've been able to look into?
I mean, there's some historic cases that are more like your classic case, but we actually do a lot of, we go out with Jay Bachochin a lot. And he's, for those who don't know, he is a Bigfoot researcher based in
Right.
southeastern Wisconsin. He put out a documentary 2 years ago.
I think it was 2018 or 2019.
I think it was 2019.
I think 2019. Yeah. Okay.
And he put out a documentary about his previous 5 years of doing research in the area, and it's all very like high strangeness kind of stuff. There's footprints, there's been some kind of more, simian ape-like sightings, but there's also a bunch of weirder stuff that happens, like time shifts, weird lights. We've gone out with our ghost box a couple times, our spirit box, and had some interesting things come out of that. So the Kettle Moraine State Forest is a forest in Wisconsin, for those who don't know. And we've explored that area, kind of like the northern part now and that southern part. And there's so much going on there that it's just, I think for me, I traditionally thought of like, Bigfoot as an undiscovered primate, but since then, this has opened my eyes, and I think it's weirder.
I mean, it's a strange area when it comes to Bigfoot reports. I think we're split pretty evenly between things that sound like the behavior of an undiscovered primate species and things that incorporate elements of other phenomena that sort of fall into that category of high strangeness, if you will. So it's compelling, I think, in many ways, especially if you look at the different areas where we're likelier to get certain reports. So, if you're talking like the Nicolet National Forest, which is a huge national forest in northern Wisconsin, now we're likelier to get sort of the undiscovered primate, sort of reports from that area. And when you look at that area, I mean, if something like that was going to live in Wisconsin, that's about the only place it could and go unnoticed. So when you look at like the Kettle Moraine State Forest, like that area, even though it's a huge state forest, it is sprawling, but there's a lot more people living in and around that area. And so the reports we get out of there will be, some of them will seem like sort of the undiscovered primate, but there's too often this accompaniment of other strange phenomena, like Emily mentioned, So in that same area, we've personally seen like weird
lights.
Like balls of light, ghost lights, whatever you want to call them. And then you do get the other reports, like she mentioned, of missing time, for instance. When you look at Jay's documentary too, which is fantastic, if people haven't seen it, it's a really interesting exploration, sort of the I think life and drive of somebody who's really interested in this stuff. But anyway, like when you look at that, there's certainly plenty of rock throwing, tree knocks, and things of that nature that you kind of associate with that undiscovered primate species. But then there is all the other weird stuff too.
Yeah.
And so the difficulty there, I think, is determining whether or not those things are related.
Yeah.
Are they just happening in the same area as a coincidence? Is there some kind of connection? Because they are happening in the exact same areas. But who knows? Honestly, I will say though that, like I mentioned before, the Kettle Moraine State Forest, I think very much sort of falls into that category of being problematic, because I just have a very hard time imagining a species like that remaining undiscovered in that area.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's not urban by any means, but again, like there's a lot of towns and people sort of living
Trails.
in and around. Yeah, and people are always out there hiking and doing all this other stuff. And so I'm open to the argument that, hey, these things are smart and they know how to hide.
Right.
Yeah, maybe. But wow, they're really, really good at it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, does that area in particular, this Kettle Moraine area, does it seem to have more in general phenomena, whether or not Bigfoot plus everything else, than other areas? I mean, does it give off like flap or window area vibes at all to you guys?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and Dogman was what we left out. That's another popular
that
one
was
in that
another
area.
one. Like, it's
obviously a big one in the Midwest too.
Northern.
Yeah.
It's interesting because when we go out with Jay, we go in the southern unit, but we've more lately been going to the northern unit where there's a big old monastery that is pretty old. That it's called Holy Hill, and that's what the area is known for. But there was a Dogman sighting there last weekend before.
Oh wow!
We went to a winding road on a glacial esker that has aspects of an urban legend of a goat man. But there are, some things that have occurred along that.
There are a couple of credible sightings
Mm-hmm.
of this goat man. I, take that for what you will.
So it's just interesting that this one forest has all this going on too.
Yeah, is the north and the south section, are they separated geographically, or are they in different areas, or why is there a north and a south?
I think it's because I'm used to how the DNR labels the different areas of trails that we go on.
Oh, okay.
So usually with Jay, we go to the southern unit, and that's kind of marked as. Whereas, I think but the section where Holy Hill is, they call that like the Holy Hill segment.
Gotcha.
But that is north of that area. That we usually go.
Right, but they would be separated a little bit.
A little bit, yeah.
I was just wondering, I guess, if it was like two separate parks, or for whatever reason, or it was just one large area that's kind of just divvied up into different sections.
It's let me see if I can describe it. So basically, I mean, there's this huge area of Wisconsin where glaciers came through, and they caused all of this turmoil. Basically, created all of these kettles and moraines and
eskers,
glacial eskers. Yeah,
right.
And so these kettle moraine state forests, like you've got the northern and southern unit, and they are somewhat separated, but they're both in the kettle moraine area, which is a huge chunk of southeastern Wisconsin, because glaciers are enormous.
Right.
And so I don't think there's anything connecting them, as far as like a line of forest. I think they're just there's a northern one and a southern one, and they're just both in the kettle moraine area.
I think the way that you had just described it, Alex, is a good way to describe it. Like, it's all technically one forest chain, but there's different sections of it.
Right. Yeah. Basically.
Yeah, I guess I was just curious because I've heard of it before. Obviously, I've seen Jay post about it. I've heard you guys talk about it, and I've heard about it as well before. Seems to be kind of a hotspot for just all kinds of weirdness. Yeah. As Carrick points out, the Holy Hill creature is one of the most famous Dogman cases, which is and he's working on a whole series about man wolf kind of files, which I'm sure touches on that and a lot of the other interesting Dogman or werewolf kind of cases. I mean, there's so many of them, but the Midwest seems to be pretty well known for quite a few of them, obviously, whether we're talking about Bray Road or the Michigan Dogman or whatever the case may be. Now, do you guys find that you get a lot of Dogman reports as well, or is it sort of a mixture of everything?
I don't know that we've ever gotten like a credible Dogman report. Huh. It's never happened. There was one that was a clear hoax a couple of years ago. It didn't take us long to debunk that one. But no, like we don't get a lot of those ourselves. Honestly, I think out of everything, probably, I mean, the fact that we've never received a credible Dogman report obviously makes that one the least popular as far as what's been sent to us. And then probably Bigfoot after that is the other one that we don't receive that many of. Although I think the reason for that is that while it's not unheard of here, obviously, I don't know that it happens as much as other places, frankly.
Right.
I don't think it's as commonplace as the Pacific Northwest, for instance. or California, any of those places where you just get a ton of reports. And so, yeah, I think in this Lake Michigan Mothman, there's been a lot of those UFO reports, pretty good amount of those. And then we get a lot of, I think because of just sort of what we do, we get a lot of the just weird high strangeness reports that sort of defy category. All kinds of strange stuff. Like we had there's like the time slip that the lady reported in Okefenokee Swamp. There was another woman who reported hearing this like strange music in the middle of nowhere. There was a lady who reported waking up to see a charcoal cloud with a glowing orange orb in it. It was very weird. And so I don't know how to categorize a lot of that stuff. It's just what's interesting about many of those, like specifically say that lady with the charcoal cloud and the glowing orb in it, is once you sort of break the story down into its base elements, it lines up with a lot of other reports of like nighttime visitation, everything from UFO abduction to reported like shadow man or haunting or whatever kind of visitation, where she wakes up to find this thing in her room with her. And that experience was sort of surrounded by a history of paranormal or seemingly paranormal phenomena that she had experienced throughout her life. And so it's really interesting to me, I think, to see cases like that where they share so many themes. Like there's so many consistent themes of like nighttime visitation, observation is a big one, because these people feel like they're being watched, which is fair if something just is seemingly staring at you while you're sleeping. I mean, I don't know what else you would call that. And so, we get a lot of just very, very strange stuff like that too, which I'm not gonna lie, those are some of my favorite. Honestly, those are the kind that I really, really enjoy. I like all the other ones too. We got a good Bigfoot report. It was in 2019. No, it was 2020 because it was at the very beginning of the pandemic. And this was up in Rhinelander, Wisconsin. And I wanted to go up there, but at that time we couldn't travel or anything because pandemic got in the way. But this was one, where very much was sort of a traditional Bigfoot encounter, or really series of encounters where people were reporting hearing these eerie howls, basically at night. There was some rock throwing, and this is Rhinelander, and so like they're not very far away from the huge national forest up there. And so that was a company, because I at least got to talk to the guy, because he sent us this video and everything of the howls, which are a contentious subject, because some people think that they are, elk or something similar. And I don't know. I'm not going to say that it definitely wasn't. But it's interesting to me when you put all of the other reported phenomena together with it, because, they had reported seeing strange things out in the woods, the rock throwing and everything. And so it was an interesting case. And I really enjoyed that one, even though it didn't really have any elements of high strangeness in it, but it was an interesting case nonetheless.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's interesting. Rhinelander, if I'm correct, is kind of known for the Hodag, right?
Yes.
That's that area.
The world famous Hodag hoax.
Which is a very interesting thing, because I think a lot of people tack that on with cryptozoology at times. And a lot of the times you also get some of those stories like the Agropelter and some of those more Paul Bunyan-esque folkloric kind of creatures that get thrown into cryptozoology.
Yes.
The logging story type stuff, which, not to say logging stories can't be reflective of creatures. I mean, even the thing I was talking about, wood devils, earlier, that's sort of was an old way of describing what we might call Bigfoot in modern times, at least out here. But speaking of that, it is interesting you're talking about, the lack of sort of Bigfoot reports in general, especially when compared not just with your organization, but it seems like the Midwest is more known for other things like Dogman or Thunderbirds or some of these stranger kind of places. Yeah, you typically think Bigfoot Pacific Northwest. When I think of the Midwest, at least, I think if you would consider even Ohio part of the Midwest, some people don't, obviously for Bigfoot, but the Upper Peninsula, certainly in Michigan, as well as northern Minnesota, I guess, has sort of a lot of Bigfoot stuff going on. Typically, those areas where there's a lot of woods and where maybe most of the reports might be something seemingly biological, at least the way it's described, without the high strangeness, which is often associated with some reports, as you were talking about. I mean, just interesting, from my own perspective, think about comparing it to New England too. I've heard there's a lot of similarities between the Midwest and New England. Just there's mountains here basically, but there's similar kind of terrain, a lot of cases, mountains excluded, a lot of woods. But out here, I mean, the more and more I look into it, the more and more Bigfoot stuff you see all over the place, just because now we have so much woods and so much territory as compared to other stuff. It seems to dominate, aside from maybe UFOs and haunting kind of stories. I mean, unless you're talking about a place like the Bridgewater Triangle or one of these window areas where there's just all sorts of stuff going on, as I'm sure you're familiar with when it comes to those kind of flap area sort of things. But yeah, all in all, it's been a very interesting discussion. I mean, do you guys want to say a little bit more about kind of what some plans are coming up with Singular Fortean Society? Anything interesting going on?
Sure.
Yeah, we are going to be in a documentary with Small Town Monsters. We're filming the end of next month on the Lake Michigan Mothman. So I think
on the trail of the
Mothman. My bad.
No, that's okay. Sorry.
That's
that. And
that's awesome.
Yeah, and then
it's funny, as I don't like to really take too much credit, but I did the first on the trail of Champ.
I remember that. It was excellent.
That's turned into this whole thing, and I remember you guys reviewed it, and it's just been so awesome. Obviously with the STM crew, and we did a whole recap last week of our trip in the PNW, and it's just been a kind of how it all accidentally happened. The format originally, it's been awesome to see that. So that's going to be really exciting. I think that'll be a little bit different than On the Trail of has been so far, in terms of just talking about either Champ or UFOs and Bigfoot. That's definitely something that's a little different for that type of filmmaking, which should be exciting.
Right. And then in end of July, we have a conference in Alton, Illinois. It's the Haunted America Conference. It'll be our third time there, because last year we couldn't go. But that's one of our favorite ones. It's set up by Troy Taylor of American Hauntings down in the southern part of Illinois, kind of near St. Louis.
He was also in Terror in the Skies.
He was, yes.
Yep.
But he's a big ghost guy, so he's got so many books out on ghosts.
That guy cranks out like 10 books a year. I don't know how he does it, and they're all great. So
so check him out.
Yeah,
very cool.
We're doing that with him, and then we'll hopefully hit the road with more investigations of our own. We like to take our society members with us. There's Patreon tiers that let us. We do like a live investigation every month. So the $10 and up membership tier at patreon.com/Singular Fortean, you can join and go on these investigations with us virtually.
Right, and that's a lot of fun. Like, we just started doing that, and it's worked out pretty well. How spotty internet signals can be when you're out in the middle of the woods. We've made it work. And so it's that has been really fun, and we look forward to doing more of that. I mean, and that's what I was talking about before. Like, when we're talking about people who really want to participate, that's where the actual full member experience is. Like, that's where that comes in. Like, that's what that's for, is for people who are really, really interested in investigation.
They want to take the extras. They're like, I've read your stories, but I want to go with you this time.
Oh, for sure.
Basically.
And we'd like to be able to, now that the pandemic is
calming down, maybe?
People are being vaccinated and things are sort of opening up again. We'd like to be able to start offering that in in person,
Yeah.
frankly, being able to offer investigations, actually going out with our members physically together.
That's cool. Yeah.
Obviously for people in this area or relatively nearby, we do like to go to conferences and stuff too. And so anytime our members could make it out to a conference or something, like, we'll always do our best to have something like that lined up as well.
Right.
So, but otherwise, what do we got? We've got our next book should be coming out over the summer here. The plan is to get it out prior to Haunted America.
Nice.
And so that is Strange Tales of the Impossible. And, I guess in some ways, it's sort of the spiritual sequel to the Lake Michigan Mothman. It's not all about, Mothman cases. There are some in there. It covers really the gamut of what we do. So you've got everything from UFOs to Bigfoot to ghosts and aliens and everything else. And so that should be interesting. I'll be happy to get that out, honestly. Boy, I think otherwise, just to keep up with us, if anybody's interested, of course, you can always go to singularfortean.com. That is our website. Otherwise,
got that linked in the comments for folks below.
Oh, excellent.
Well,
otherwise,
you can find our social media through there.
Absolutely. So, Facebook, Twitter, Tumblr, Instagram, all of the social medias that we are aware of, we're on them.
We're not on TikTok, though. Don't find us on.
No, I have a personal TikTok, and I got it exclusively for that Sasquatch playing the saxophone. That's the only thing I subscribe to. It's the only thing I watch.
Oh boy,
it's
that's funny. I've seen some of those. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, awesome. Well, like I said, folks, I've got a link in the description below if you want to go just read some of their articles. Like I said, I think there's just some great stuff about, some of the stuff that's been seen online, just like a great summation, and definitely check them out. They've got some interesting stuff going on, especially if you're in the Midwest. Probably a great resource to check out. And if you're interested in that Mothman stuff, definitely check out, the written works. I've read Lake Michigan Mothman, thought it was excellent. So I'll definitely be looking forward to the new installment there with a little bit more, high strangeness sort of stuff. And it's always interesting, for those of us that do fit a little bit more on that flesh and blood category for some things, but with other things, being open-minded, it's always fun to read about all the different types of things going on out there, because those of us that, just because we have one set of beliefs doesn't mean we don't entertain other ideas. And, I've had UFO experiences and other things that are clearly beyond our current ability to understand what is, physical or reality or whatever. So really interesting. I'm sure we could probably talk about that all night long, but just want to thank everyone in the comments for all the questions. Kevin says, nice talk tonight. Great guests. Thank you, Kevin. And thanks again, everybody, for your questions and comments and everything. And thank you for Tobias and Emily for coming on tonight.
Well, thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So, guys, as I mentioned at the beginning of the show, just go over it again. Next Monday, we'll be doing a cryptid panel we're going to be doing a cryptid panel with Jeremiah Byron of the Bigfoot Society podcast, Greg Morrill of All the Weird, and Tate Hieronymus, maybe a few other guests popping in. So it should be a good time. Again, Wood Devil stickers, New Hampshire Bigfoot stickers down. There's a link to that in the comments if you want to help support the channel. Just a fun little sticker I had Carrick actually make. So until then, guys, please feel free to subscribe, share if you like this kind of content. Drop me a comment if you have any guest suggestions. I do have a lot of awesome guests coming up as well in the next couple months here. I'm pretty much booked up until the summer at this point. So we have a lot of great shows coming up. So thank you guys as always for tuning in, and have a great rest of your week, everybody. And we'll see you guys next week.